Shrewsbury voted for Brexit last year, as did Shropshire. And my party leader is cognizant of the need to respect the wishes of the British people who voted in overwhelming numbers, 17 million, for Brexit. I believe that Mrs. May has the vision, the leadership skills to implement an effective Brexit, which will lead to great prosperity for our nation and a good new relationship with the European Union. Whereas some of the other parties are trying to impede Brexit, it's very, very important that we go ahead, and only Theresa May has that ability and drive to get us something tangible. Also, I'd like to say that today the employment figures show that unemployment has fallen by 53,000 in this quarter. We are now at the lowest unemployment rate since 1975. We are growing the economy. We are growing the economy of the country terribly into debt. Thank you very much. I think we're going to have
I would say you wouldn't have this in your classrooms.
Yeah, I'm Emma Bullard. I've lived in Shrewsbury since 2000. As we're talking about education this evening, I'll just tell you that both my children went to Millbrace School and Shrewsbury Sixth Form College, where they both had fantastic education. Although I know some of the things we're going to be talking about this evening. My son took his A-levels in 2012. That will ring lots of bells with many of you. His was the year that had their EMA taken away and huge cuts in pastoral support at the Sixth Form College. His was the first year that paid. We would return all academies and free schools to the control of the local authority. We would scrap SATs. I think this is where I pause for applause.
Thank you very much. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is an absolute pleasure and a privilege to be back here once again as Labour's candidate in Shrewsbury. I was formerly an army officer. I'm a doctor. I'm a mum. My youngest is just 10 weeks old, so the timing of the election wasn't perfect, but I'm enjoying the challenge nonetheless. Since I joined the Labour Party when I was 16 years old, I've been a passionate campaigner for social justice. And the simple principle that undermines my entire ideology is that it is categorically unfair that purely by accident of birth, some children are destined to do well in life and some children are not. Now, I do appreciate that doing well in life is a somewhat ambiguous term, but let's take it to be fulfilling educational potential, sustaining employment, being able to form lasting relationships and being healthy. It's unfair that children from poorer backgrounds do worse at school than their wealthier peers. It's wrong that employment prospects as adults are affected by things that are completely beyond the control of that child. Small gaps in advantage early on are magnified later in life, and this is simply not a situation I am prepared to accept. Now, I know that all of you know that education is the foundation upon which social justice can be built. Many of the advances made since 1997 under the Labour government are being eroded by a toxic combination of fiscal incompetence and ideological mismanagement. The discrepancy in life chances between one child and another is not born within a day of each other in the same town, to me is not just a tragedy, but it's a crime. Conservative education policies have and will only exacerbate the problem. Savage cuts to funding, which will affect the poorest the hardest. Grammar schools, which are divisive and unfair. Continuation of the state subsidy of private schools via charitable status. Early years provision. 1,200 Sure Start centres have been closed since 2010. And finally, university tuition fees, which Labour will scrap and reintroduce maintenance grants, so that university education is something accessible to everybody, not just those whose parents can afford to bail them out of debt. It's every politician's responsibility and duty to use their ability and their conscience to develop sound, economically achievable and evidence-based policies. And it's the evidence base among education professionals that we need to use. Thank you very much.
Evening on such an important topic, which as a parent and a local school governor is very close to my heart, and thank you to all of you for coming. But of course the biggest thank you this evening goes to all the teachers in the room. You do a really difficult and really important job, and I take my hat off to you all, so thank you for the soul and the passion that you put into our children's and our country's future. Shropshire Councillor and a Shrewsbury Town Councillor now for 5 years, and I sit on the Young People's Scrutiny Committee, and also I observe the Schools Forum, which looks at schools funding. So there are several issues over the last 5 years that have been really concerning me about our schools and about our education system. Firstly, education should not be about churning out economically productive units, human beings that are going to make the economy go better. It should principally be about enabling young people to be happy and healthy and engaged members of our community. And as a byproduct, they can also engage with the world of work. So I'm really concerned about the narrowing of our education curriculum and the overemphasis on academic achievement and the pushing away of the arts and vocational subjects. And I'm also concerned about the Ofsted regime that has teachers teaching to the test instead of developing each child, and this it's dispiriting for both teachers and for pupils. I'm deeply concerned about education funding. Actually, that's not true. I'm livid about education funding. My 2 kids are in primary school in Shrewsbury, and I can see their future and their educational experience diminish next year, the year after, and the year after because of this Conservative government's spending plans. It's a crime.
I am Edward Higginbottom. I am the UKIP candidate. I first have to thank Daniel Kaczynski, because if he hadn't threatened to pull out of this event, UKIP would not have been invited, because the NUT has a policy of not having UKIP at any meeting. Basically, I am a local person. I've lived in Shropshire since 1959. I am standing for UKIP because obviously I agree with their policies. My interests are varied. Education is not one of my specialist subjects. I have done as much reading as I can in the last few days, in the last 12 hours since I knew I was coming. And I hope that I will be able to explain UKIP's policies, which are varied on education.
Possible, and we'll start with Daniel on funding.
Well, first of all, I think that it's very, very difficult because, of course, the country is very much in debt. 1.7 trillion pounds of the country is in debt by 1.7 trillion pounds following the terrible economic crisis of 2008. Governments have had to borrow huge amounts of money, although we've reduced the annual deficit year on year since we took office. And of course there are constraints. Everybody would like to give more funding for Shropshire schools, and I'm very proud that in the last Parliament we managed to get an extra £10.2 million for Shropshire schools, funding that went to the 69 local authorities with the lowest per pupil funding. And again, in the funding formula that we have been putting through Parliament, I have been campaigning with other Conservative MPs about the unfairness of the fact that Salopian children get £4,000 per annum, whereas children in London, in certain metropolitan areas, get £8,000 or £9,000 per annum. That funding mechanism is being changed, but many Labour MPs in inner city areas who get double what we get are furious that we are trying to change this funding mechanism. They believe that they are entitled to double what we get in Shropshire, and they are trying to prevent us from making these changes happen. But one thing I must add, and I spoke very briefly at the start, I want to say to you today that the NUT are putting out figures about these cuts to our schools. And they've organised marches, and also they are putting out literature here which is saying the Priory School is going to lose this amount of money, £396,000, and that means that Priory School is going to lose 11 teachers. Let me say to you that today I spent the afternoon with former Labour councillor Alan Parkhurst former deputy mayor of our town, at his school in Monkmore. He is appalled by the actions of the NUT, and he believes that, and he said to me that he wants me to say this publicly at this meeting, he believes that the NUT are deliberately misrepresenting the cuts that are taking place. Well, look, either we all get a chance to. I'm sure, as the chairman said, you wouldn't behave like this to you wouldn't want your children to behave like this in class.
What I would say is, I'm not asking you to agree with anybody, just respect.
And let me also finish by saying I also asked the Priory School today what their interpretation was. They are horrified by what the NUT is doing, and feel that this is scaremongering and obviously lowering morale for their teachers, and they do not recognise these facts. So, there's a carrot and stick here. If I'm re-elected, all the Shropshire MPs hold regular meetings with the important people in our constituencies who provide local services, the 5 of us. And we don't act in silos, we don't act by ourselves, we work collectively, because a lot of the issues affect all of the MPs across the whole of Shropshire. My challenge to you is, although I disagree, and other teachers disagree with some of your figures, I'm happy to try to engage in a more constructive way with the NUT, and to invite you on a quarterly basis to come and meet all the Shropshire MPs at our regular quarterly meetings at the Shire Hall, so that we can hear directly from you what your concerns are. I have taken many head teachers from Shrewsbury to meet directly with the Secretary of State for Education on specific issues and concerns. But I've only done those with teachers who have proactively come to me, challenged me, and asked for my support. And I very much hope we won't be able to get a good relationship in this room during the course of a 1.5 hour debate. But I am genuinely serious about engaging with the NUT, if re-elected, to try to work collaboratively with you to raise the concerns that you have with the next Conservative government.
Daniel, it took George Osborne 2 days as editor of the Evening Standard to splash on the Tory party row, I guess you could say, over the new funding system, the proposed new funding system. Is a vote for the Conservative Party a vote for a party that doesn't agree with itself on this?
Well, of course there are big differences of opinion in my party and many other parties about how to resolve this issue. But if I just ask you, all of you, to go on Hansard, to go on Hansard, do the research yourselves to find out what we've been doing in Parliament to try to get the funding mechanism changed. I've created a caucus of 45 Conservative MPs, and we've been campaigning collectively directly with the Secretary of State for Education. It is iniquitous and unfair that Salopian children get £4,000 per annum, where children in inner city areas get double that. It's very controversial. It's a very difficult funding mechanism to change, but in the latest proposed settlement, our figures will be going up from £151 million per annum to £153 million per annum. And let me just say this to you. If you don't believe me, that some of these teachers that I've met today and who have written to me are concerned about the actions of the NUT, and if you don't believe me that they don't recognise the figures that the NUT are putting out, may I ask you please to go to these head teachers yourselves and ask them about their interpretations, because the ones I've met today are seriously concerned about what the NUT is doing. And I've just answered his question.
Our head teacher sent that information home with the children.
Are you saying he's lying?
I'm not saying he's lying. I'm saying that the 2 teachers that I spoke to today have a serious concern about the responsibility of the Member of Parliament is to get more funding from Shropshire schools. Last year, I got an extra £10.2 million for Shropshire schools. This year, the budget is going from 151 to 153 million pounds. And many of you scoff and were really angry and irritated when I talked about the debts of this nation. But let me say this to you. Whereas we have to spend more time with you to understand some of the pressures that you're under, and by the way, today Mr. Parkhurst told me about the extraordinary challenges that he faces in Monkmoor in his school, and the extraordinary amount of pastoral care that he has to give those children, and the real difficulties with Ofsted and with SADS and all the other things, whereas I need to spend more time with you to understand the pressures that you are under. So please, you need to understand some of the extraordinary pressures that we are under as the government. We could technically do as the Green candidate would have us do by not replacing Trident. Okay, well that she doesn't want us to replace Trident. We could give you more money for that. But those are not viable options.
Okay.
As I recall, and nobody in this room calls that credit, already wealthy financial institutions greedily looking to lend money to people in the cynical belief they could repossess any assets they had if they defaulted, as they thought was likely, on the money they was lending, caused that credit crunch.
Okay.
Now, well, hang on, a bit more than that. Now, since that time, it seems to me, what we've had is a redistribution of wealth in the other direction.
Very uneven.
What we actually saw was banks continue to be largely unregulated, cuts in corporation tax, the institution I work in cut by around 14% in post-16 education, which has been savagely cut throughout that period. And I'd also remind the Liberal Democrat candidate that those actions were instituted by a coalition, not just by the Conservatives. Those policies of savage cuts, not just in education, and I've seen valued colleagues leave, my colleagues, because of those cuts. I know that I could do less for my students than I could 6 years ago. I see teaching assistants who don't know if they're secure in their employment and sometimes have to leave and so on. Not just there, but across a whole range of vulnerable people. Disability benefit cuts.
Okay.
So
we're going a bit off topic. I'm going to have to leave it there. We've got to get through the whole
I'd like
topic.
to just say I'm going to vote for redistribution of wealth in the right direction.
Okay. Yes.
I just want to make a very quick point.
Yes, quickly.
Daniel quoted Hansel, and I want to quote the Institute of Fiscal Studies, a report from February 2017. And it's looking at comparative spending over a period up until 2020. And it says what we're experiencing would be the biggest real terms fall in school spending per pupil for the last 20 years, at least the last 30 years. And the primary and secondary school spending per pupil is expected to fall by £300 to £400 per pupil. You may poo-hoo the NUT. This is the Institute of Fiscal Studies telling you that there's a fall in spending.
Okay, there will be another question.
The question is about Steve's school and the cuts that he's having to make, and that are obviously incredibly painful to make because of the impact on the children in the school and the staff who are losing their jobs. And to think that that using a reading support charity and the music service being cut. I mean, it just goes back to everything I was saying. The education is about life. It's about everything in life, and it's about allowing children and all of us to participate in the quality of life as much as possible. And it's not just a matter of kind of filling in boxes. And so I think we have to be very, very worried about what Steve is saying, and I know that he's been at his school a long time and that he will be best placed to know exactly the impact that's having on the pupils. So I just don't think it can be justified. We have investing in our children and in education has to be the test of a good society. And I would just say to Daniel, I know he got the extra 10 million for Shropshire schools, but the funding per pupil this year is lower than it was in 2014-15. So I don't know what happened to that money, but it clearly is not enough. It hasn't prevented the cuts, and we have to look at another way, and we do have to look at other ways of finding money and thinking what our priorities are in society. And you can laugh about wanting to scrap Trident, but I actually think it would be so much more useful to invest in our children.
It's not a laughing matter.
Daniel, your government is in power for 7 years. If the economy is improving so much, why aren't people feeling it? You always seem to say that savage cuts in funding are the result of a need for austerity. But, I mean, post-World War II, when the country was on its knees and the economy was worse than ever and we were in enormous debt, the government founded the NHS. Everybody knows that the way to grow an economy, the way to reduce the deficit through economic growth is by sensible investment in public services. Could be a better investment or a better area to invest in than our children's futures. Secondly, you're implying that the NUT are destroying teachers' morale. I think I can think of some other reason why teachers' morale is so low. The people sitting in front of you aren't some kind of red-under-the-bed militants. They're highly educated professionals who are seeing at first hand the impact of your government's policies, which I must underline, for 5 years were aided and abetted by the Liberal Democrats.
Last time you fought this seat, it was under a very, very different leader. Now,
yes,
under what you would call classic socialism. Are you on board with that, on Corbyn and his different way of running the party?
I don't think it's appropriate to sort of criticise Jeremy Corbyn as if, again, he's some sort of, modern-day communist. That is clearly not the case. Our manifesto, which was unveiled on Tuesday, is fully costed. It's sensible. There are evidence-based plans, but Jeremy Corbyn and the rest of the Labour Party know that, as I said, the way to grow an economy, the way to reduce the deficit, is to invest properly in public services. There is such a gap at the moment. There is such a gap at the moment between the wealthier in society and the poorest, and that's something that must be redressed. And it's really important not to get personal as well. Don't fall for the spin. Don't fall for the slight scruffiness. He may not wear a tie, but he wears his heart on his sleeve, and I think that is more important.
Thank you. As I said in my opening remarks, the current situation with funding really angers me. One of the issues around the numbers, how much a school's going to lose, it's going to be X, Y or Z, is that schools are being faced with cuts of all sorts from all different directions at the moment. They've lost education support grants, there's the national funding formula, which is not at all fair. There are the general expenses that schools are now being faced to cope with themselves that they never used to have to. So the NUT's figures are different than the national funding formula figures, and there's lots of contradiction. These are the numbers here about what our schools in Shrewsbury are going to lose as a result of the national fair funding formula, and these were produced by government and sent to Shropshire Council, and there is no doubt that this is seriously, seriously bad news for our school. Now, funnily enough, this afternoon, I also had quite a long chat with Mr. Parkhurst. I came away with a very different picture. His school, with a budget of £1 million, is going to lose £110,000, over 10%. And he went through a long list, very similar to the list that the questioner gave, of how he is dancing around this number, desperately trying not to lose teaching time. and trying to cut anything but teaching time, and the choices he's having to make are horrendous. This funding formula is a disaster for Shropshire schools. It's a disaster for national schools, but for Shropshire schools where we've had poor funding for years and years and years and years, it is desperate, it is wrong, and it should be stopped. And the Liberal Democrats in government would stop it. We would stop cuts to education, we would fund the funding gap, and we would fund more to ensure that, yes, there does need to be a formula which apportions funding fairly throughout the country. But what's happening with this particular formula is that they are guaranteeing that no schools lose money, which means that the schools that don't have enough at the moment don't get what they need. So you can't have a fair funding formula without additional cash. You must put more cash into it. And whether you do that is about your priorities. And clearly the Conservative government's priorities are not with education because they are refusing to fund it. This can be funded. The Liberal Democrats are proposing to fund it with a rising corporation tax. It's a priority. Education has always been at the heart of Lib Dem policy. It means that people can have the future that they deserve no matter where they come from and what their background. And in coalition government, we are so proud of the pupil premium and the help that gives to the disadvantaged in our society, and the schools that cope with high numbers of kids who really need additional support. The pupil premium has done absolute wonders.
Question, it was basically, what would I do if I was elected to help improve the situation for financing of schools? Well, as an MP, obviously, I would need to talk to the people who know something about education, which is people in schools, and I would then need to go and talk to the government departments responsible and to my fellow MPs and try and persuade them that a different course of action needs to be taken. As I understand the situation, more money has been put into education than ever before, but there is actually more children in education than ever before, so therefore clearly the money per child has decreased. We in UKIP make no great promises that we are going to suddenly magic up billions of pounds from nowhere to put into education. We have policies to change the education system, and which some teachers will of course find undesirable, but we would be looking at the public finances to try and invest in our country, not only education but also the health service. And to digress slightly, somebody raised the question about the economy, and my colleague in the Labour Party raised the question about the National Health Service. What people need to understand is that expanding the public sector is all very nice, but first of all you need to expand the economy to pay for it. And in fact, you can make an argument that the creation of the National Health Service and the welfare state in the 1940s was a mistake because it put economic burden on the country which it could not sustain, because everything had been also nationalised and the economy was in ruins and the money should have gone into rebuilding the economy. If you compare us to Germany, post-Second World War, they put all their efforts into rebuilding their economy. After they rebuilt their economy, they did not create their welfare state and their health service until about 10 years after the war, and they were therefore able to fund a much better education system than we've got and a much better health service than we've got. It's an argument that you should perhaps consider.
Let me say to you that there are two things we can do to massively increase spending. We can either increase taxation. We could increase taxation. And you're shouting hooray. The interesting thing is, when the last Labour Party increased taxation on higher earners from 45 pence in the pound to 50 pence in the pound, it was a very popular measure. Revenues to the Exchequer went down as a result of that increase, because the more you tax businesses and individuals, the more likely they are, people react to taxation policies. This is why, we go and buy things as cheaply as possible. in duty-free or whatever it is, people react to different taxation policies. And you can't get away. Let me finish the answer. When that increase came about, revenue actually fell. Now, the top 1% of society in this country already pay 26% of all tax raised. And calibrating the taxation policy to maximize revenue is very, very important. And if you overtax businesses, they will move away and they will set up factories overseas. So these Labour policies of increasing taxation, although very popular, would have a devastating impact on our competitiveness and on our economy. I can't answer the questions if they're also... And let me just say one last thing, because they've had a lot.
Okay, one more.
Look, in the good days, I mean, when we came into office, and I will use this again, they left us a little note saying, sorry, there's no money...
Listen to the answer, come on.
We had been paying off the debts when we were in government. And then when Mr. Blair came in the good days, not in the crisis, but in the good days, they were borrowing over 50 billion a year. Now, let me just say this to you, and I want you to remember this fact. We spend more money servicing the national debt than we spend on the entire education budget. And if there's one thing that I have realized in my political lifetime, is that if we don't get a grip on public finances, if we don't think about future generations, we will end up in a situation not too dissimilar to Greece and other countries where we will need a bailout. And so, yes, it's very important to make these tough, difficult decisions.
Okay, we're going to have to move on from funding. Aaron Gartside.